All right, well, I had a leak, fuel leak on the 795 model dually F350. It's the 7.3 turbo. Now, I did a lot of research as far as what are the most common leaks on these trucks, and a lot of people were saying that right under the fuel filter housing, there's quite a bit of leaks that happen there because of the O-rings. Sometimes you take it to the shop and they'll replace all the housing and all that and tell you that that's all that they have to do it, but that's not true. All they have to replace is those O-rings most of the time. Those those bowls can actually be rebuilt and super economical. I think saw another video also. Another guy mentioned that he spent like $30 rebuilding it instead of having to get a whole new one. But that's not where my leak was. My leak wasn't coming out of those gaskets. At one point, I thought that it might have been the lines that go from the pump and those lines back there, right there, that wrap back around and put it back into the heads. It's one on this side and one on that side. So I really couldn't see because of all this components here, the turbo. But after having this thing cranked and with the light, I took all this top housing part off, this cover. I was able to really spend some time looking at those lines. Those lines were not causing my leak. See that valley down in there? Still has some fuel in it. I haven't cleaned it out. But that's not where my leak was coming. Ends up being that there's some hoses here. This one here, this is the pump. Then this line here is from the tank. Over here, it comes back, it pushes it into this fuel filter bowl, and then at the bottom, if you can see down there, there's a fuel line. Let me see. Right down there where those clamps are. There's a fuel line down there that goes from the bowl back into that pump, and that's what ends up being pushed through those lines right up through there. So that's where my leak was. It was a pin-sized hole. Because it's pressurized, as I was driving down the road, it really wasn't, the smell wasn't coming in, and it was still drivable, but when I would stop, it's when that fuel would start slushing in there in that that valley, and I started getting all sorts of leaks. It's just, it was leaking crazy from the bottom. What I ended up doing is trying to avoid removing all of the turbo back there with all those crazy bolts that are just insane to get to, including the pedestal. And also, I didn't want to have to remove the fuel filter housing, because of course, if it's not broken, why fix it? So I didn't want to have to replace those gaskets down at the bottom where apparently there's a lot of these that leak. I wanted just to go ahead and do this very easy, not have to spend a lot of time, spend my whole weekend working on the truck. I ended up still doing that because I had to learn how to work with these hoses here, but wanted to share with you guys, you could probably get it done within an hour, hour and a half if that's where your leak is on one of those lines. Now, in order to get down to that line down there where the leak was, I had to remove this hose right here, the one that goes from the pump back into the fuel filter. So before I removed any of those hoses, though, I took out my fuel filter, and this model 7.3 has the drain, this yellow thing right here. You just spin it that way, and it'll drain down at the bottom, drain it all out. Some of them will have it back here on the bottom, but this model has it up here. So I drained the canister out, and then was able to remove that top line out, that hose. That was still a good hose, so I put that hose back in once I replaced the bottom one. Now the bottom one, when I took it out, the one that had the pin-sized hole in it, I just took it out with a pair of needle nose pliers. So I ended up breaking it because I was going to replace it anyway. But it was real brittle. So it ends up being this line, maybe about 2 inches in length. Now, here's that pump that I mentioned, and that line goes into here. Now, out of the housing of the fuel filter, there's that other line. Now, in the middle here, there's only about a half an inch gap between those two lines. So I was trying to scratch my head how I was going to get this 2-inch line through that half-inch hole. So I figured I didn't need all 2 inches, so I took off 3/8 of an inch so that I was able to push it in on one side, bring it all the way back as far as I could go to be able to put the other end down and then pull it back over onto the other side, the other pipe, the other line that's coming out. And that worked out just fine. It ended up being like 3/8 on each side. So that worked out great. You could do that. It's real easy. Well, now let me rephrase that. You're going to say some foul words, but it definitely beats not having to remove all of the turbo and the housing for the fuel filter and all that. It's just some clamps and hoses. I ended up spending like 30 cents on that repair. The line was a 3/8, but I didn't have that. I had 11/30 seconds here at the house, so that's what I ended up using. And it turned out just fine. I just cranked it back up and looked underneath it, and it's not leaking anymore. I'll show you when I pulled it into the shop how much it was leaking, and it still dripped there. That big puddle you see there still dripped there as I was working on it, but right now it's just fine. No more leaks. It's nasty down here just from that diesel blowing. Just all that grime became just nastiness down here. I gotta take it to the car wash and clean this bay up. But anyway, folks, I just wanted to show you what I did, and hopefully it helps. If it doesn't, I do apologize. Sorry for wasting 7 of your minutes. But if it does, you're welcome. Just kidding. Anyway, you guys have a good one.